What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Happness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is a returning guest, Joep Hegger, who is a voice coach, and we speak about how we can use our voice to have more voice. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, scroll down to the show notes to download my free one-page summary. And now, lean back and get inspired. Joep, welcome back.
It's so nice to be back.
The voice.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
Yes, you spend lots of time doing research about the voice and how we can use our voice for more impact. And so it was time for an update.
Yeah.
And before we're getting there, I still don't want to leave my standard question behind.
Super.
How is it about you? Do you call yourself a facilitator?
I would definitely call myself a facilitator, yeah.
Beautiful. What does facilitation mean to you then?
Facilitation to me means checking in with the actual situation, including the participants and the content, but definitely also myself. And especially after my recent research, which pointed more towards the source, like us ourselves being also part of the audience, like we are hosting whatever it is, a talk, a workshop, we're hosting it for the entire audience, including ourselves. And what I've been going to lately as a facilitator is realizing that if I make it work for me, I make it work for everybody, And then, that's not the entire job, of course. Like you still do have to take the content into account, of course, and then most importantly, the audience. But this part definitely dawned on me recently. Yeah.
It reminds me of something that I recently reflected upon, is that in order to create the sense of psychological safety for a group or a person, we first of all have to feel safe ourselves.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's what I hear from what you're saying, that you're the source, the audience includes yourself. So you also need to host yourself, facilitate yourself.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. We're going to get to this, I'm sure, later on in the podcast, but I've been looking a lot into the way bodies mirror other bodies and the psychology behind that. Obviously, it's massively important for the voice as well, but like this translates one-to-one to everything, human, essentially, when you share a room, especially.
So this would mean that with my voice now, I kind of mirror yours. So you have this kind of soft tone and it's quite slow. And I just catch myself that I might indeed do that.
Yeah, it may be the case, and listeners can check in with themselves too to see how they feel physically now. What happens is, sound is one of the first of the senses to give information to the brain. Like sound and smell are first, then comes, after a small pause, visual information. And then for a long while, nothing much happens. And then only after a while, cognitive stuff like language and stuff like that starts to kick in. So what happens is that smell and sound strongly influence how we perceive whatever somebody is communicating, or rather the entire package of what that person is communicating to us, right? So I'm kind of like coating my language, and like you see me on the screen, and you just told me that you're going to put it on YouTube so people can check it out too. Well, you kind of like perceive all of me now through a coating of sound, really. So what your body does is it mimics in itself what it would be like to produce a voice like the one you're hearing, right? So you're kind of like literally copying, because your body is trying to find out how I am feeling, right? Because of communication. You want to know as a human, like in being in conversation with me, you would like to know consciously or subconsciously how I am feeling, right? How I'm doing, what I actually mean, what the subtext of what I'm saying is. And one of the main clues here is sound. So in order to get that information without asking the words, the body can fix it another way, which is instantly copy it. without ourselves even being aware of it, and then interpreting, using that, to interpret what this other person is saying.
Yeah. I think it's just kind of an old instinct of survival. So I want to know how you feel because I want to know, am I in danger or am I safe?
Right.
And I remember from our last conversation that you said that we can read someone's voice as we can read a body language.
Yeah.
So this is also kind of linked to this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do I hear something that could put me in danger in your voice? And do I have to act accordingly?
Yeah. And this puts us back to this facilitation question, right? Because we also, these are potentially obvious dangers. Opportunity and ease, right, are also states that we can communicate this way, right? So if I start, this brings to mind perhaps like job interview studies. Like there's been a lot of study around the topic of effectivity of job interviews, right? Much more than any other conversation type, I would guess, based on what I know now. And what all of these studies have in common is that the outcome is decided within seconds of it starting. Now, obviously, you're not going to get to any content within seconds of a conversation starting, so it must be something else. And since sound is processed by the brain faster than visuals, right? I'm guessing that the voice has a massive impact on decision-making there, on the end of the interviewers.
Yeah, which reminds me of the book, I don't remember her name, about with the dominant posing. Presence. Amy Cuddy. See, that's why it's good to color code your books. Yeah,
that's it. Okay, for the people who are only listening now, I'm looking at a screen where Miriam has color coded their books. Fantastic. I instantly noticed when we entered the call. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I remember the color of a book better than the title.
Right.
And then if I'm searching for a book, I know exactly what to look at.
Oh, yay.
So, yes, I could prove my theory right just now. So what she writes is they conducted experiments where they asked in job interviews the applicants to either do dominant posing before walking in the room, just by themselves individually, or submissive posing. And then they walked into the room and had the job interview, and they could find a significant impact of the posing beforehand. So this would link to the body language.
Wow, yeah.
And then in combination with the voice. And I think what I can imagine is that voice is also something that we link to maybe early childhood memories. Because a baby in the womb, they hear the voice of their mother kind of first.
Yeah, well, actually, not in the room, but in the womb, right? Or did you say that?
Yes.
Oh, you did say that.
Yes.
Yeah, cool. For the people who mistook it for room, like me. Womb, yeah. And there's something super interesting about acoustics there, because we don't hear the entire vocal spectrum, right? In the womb, we hear a filtered sound, right? So we hear the voice the way we would hear our own voice if we were to close our ears and speak. We hear the lower frequencies of our overtone spectrum, right? Which is another way of saying, like in the bassier parts of the voice, there's what we would typically say, or I guess just more everyday language would say a warm voice, right? The warmth of it is there. And the brightness, which would be the piercy sounds, right? They're more up in the frequency spectrum. And there is something interesting here. There are two things that are interesting here. Why do we call this warm and not just low? Because they are acoustically seen, physically, scientifically seen, they're just low frequencies. They move less up and down in time. But we experience them as warm. Why? Well, perhaps it's because we have these memories of the earliest moments. Yeah. But it may also be that the voice creates more of those overtones. We allow for more of those overtones when we are at ease ourselves.
True, because we are less cramped. So now if I cramp up, I guess you can hear it in my voice. Right?
Yeah, so tension in specifically your abdominal area will result in a partial closure of the vocal tract just above your vocal folds, meaning that you're filtering out a part of the overtones like you're hearing now. And when I'm easing that part of my body, you can hear that my voice is opening back up, allowing for specifically more of those lower frequencies. Right.
And before we dive deeper into, I was thinking of this one question that might sound silly, but I would be just curious about your answer. What do you mean when you say the voice?
Right. Well, that's an excellent question because especially in the English language, the voice means different things, right? You would be like, most people think, oh, it's just one of the features of the human body, I guess, like a communication means. But if we think about it, the voice resembles much more, right? The voice also means having a voice, having a say in something, having a voice for oneself, being able to express oneself. And that's even twofold. You can express yourself, like you can express what you mean, but you can also express or, have trouble expressing yourself authentically. We mirror ourselves instantly when we hear our voice. And that may give us a notion of, yay, we're in shape. We're totally rocking who we are. We're feeling self-embodied here. Or we may be hearing something like, I don't know if this is the real me right now. Somehow I feel limited in my expression of myself. And this can be, and that's immensely powerful. But when I say the voice, I typically mean, for starters, the actual sound made by the human body, right? Because you have to start somewhere. So vibrations in the air that our ears register as sound, it's made by our vocal folds that are in our throat that are aided by 40 plus muscle groups in the body. That's the voice to me as a starting point. And then in the second row, I would say, is everything else, how the voice works on us and in the world, what it evokes. Now, in doing vocal work, right, like in studying one's own voice or improving voices, these two different dimensions of the voice cannot be separated, right? Because we are improving or changing, redesigning or designing a new type of voice for a reason. And that reason will always be external to the voice itself, external to the process of making those vibrations in the air.
And it almost sounds as if this might be the title of the show. How to use your voice to have a voice.
Yeah, that may be true. Well, that's a perfect way of summarizing it, really.
Right? Because from what I hear is, how can we use our voice to really express our full selves that is beyond just the words we're speaking out?
Yes. And I will even extend it to when you use the voice to express yourself truthfully, like the authentic self that you would desire to be in that situation, you facilitate finding the right words because you facilitate ease of mind.
Bam. Yes. We use less capacity, less brain power to kind of fake something or to squeeze.
Exactly. You're essentially just limiting anxiety or countering it, really. And this is science, by the way. People have studied this in the course of singing, right? Because there's been 2 studies conducted in the UK where they looked at the chemical components of participants' blood before and after singing. And since singing and speaking is more or less the same, right? Like there's only aesthetical differences. The physical process for the body and the mind is the same thing. I forget what these exact I'm bad at remembering hormone names, essentially, and chemicals names. But basically, a combination that makes us happier, more at ease, and is serving as an antidepressant and anti-cancer medicine.
Wow. So it's basically the cocktail of serotonin and dopamine and endorphin, all these kind of happy hormones. Right?
Yes, you have this.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And then think about what that does to anxiety limitation, right? Yeah.
And that's why singing is so healing, I guess.
Yeah, well, I will put it like this. It goes for speaking too, but since we sing less, there's less motor like automation going on, right? Since we do speaking like all the time, and we've been doing that for years, it's hard to just do something new. And for most people, since they don't sing all the time, even professional singers sing only 10% of their vocal action time. Then 90% is still speaking, even with professional singers. You can imagine that like singing is extra powerful because it's easier to do something new, essentially.
And what comes to my mind is, so I'm a terrible singer. I really am. I don't even sing under the shower. So I just don't sing because I think I'm so terrible at it. I have the perfect melody in my head and then I open my mouth and I don't know what's coming out there. And what I realize when I do sing and it makes me happy is that in order to get this full power out of my mouth, I really have to put it all in. So it's like speaking very loudly with lots of energy, and then it becomes a kind of singing. And I can imagine that this therefore relates that we are using the voice in a different way when we are singing because we're just taking more space, literally. And our entire body posture changes because when I sit like this, I cannot sing because my body doesn't have enough space to, and I'm cramping up for those who don't see the video. I don't have the space for the voice to really expand.
Yeah, like it does. You're saying a couple of interesting things there. Let me say that the thing that probably goes for most people is the not crunching part. Right? Because what you do when you sit up straight, which is like I typically use the example of placing the weight of your head over your sit bones or over the heels rather than the toes, right? And then directing the chest not towards the ground, also not straight ahead, but rather to the first balcony is what I typically say because I typically work with professional speakers and singers. And if you're on stage in a theater, right, the audience is slightly below you. And there will be one or two balconies overhead the main floor. And the first balcony would be slightly above your own level, right? And you're directing yourself to those seats because in bigger traditional theaters, that's where the most important people are seated, right? But also in like meeting rooms and even in private conversation, that can be a good trick for the body because what you do is you do open up. You place the weight of your arms essentially, and with that, your shoulder blades firmly on the back side of your rib cage, like inviting those inter-rib muscles to become wider, slowing down your exhalation, which is good for exhalation speed, stability, right? Because your typical sigh will be lots of air in the beginning and then less towards the end, right? But for vocal stability, you would like a continuous stream of air. So by sitting up straight, you're facilitating that for yourself, right? And then by having this long abdominal stretch, every inhalation becomes a relaxation because if you then inhale, especially towards the abdomen, you stretch the abdomen, right? Because you stretch all the muscles and that's a relaxation for them. And if you then exhale, that's also a relaxation for a different part of the body, right? So the reason why you experience that liberty when you are positioning yourself like that and trying to sing is partially, and I would perhaps even say mainly due to the fact that you're facilitating one of the main ingredients, which is your respiratory cycle, your exhalation, your inhalation. Yeah.
Fascinating. So basically posture and the voice are so closely entangled.
Absolutely. Yeah. This goes for speaking too, by the way, but it's much more easy to notice, like you say, when you sing, because of what I said earlier, because we have much less connotations to singing than we have to speaking. So noticing new stuff in speaking is much harder, even though the mechanics of it are the same.
Numbers game. And I want to come back to something that you said earlier, that the first thing we perceive is the voice before anything else. So unconsciously through our brain.
Right.
Before physical appearance or even the words that we are saying.
Yeah.
And now I wonder, with so much conversations happening via video conferencing, where sometimes the voice is a little bit delayed, do you think that this has any impact then?
It depends on the speed. If the conversation is not lively, like if the conversation does not require people constantly interrupting or adding to each other's speech, then it's no problem, right? The typical delay is about 1/4 of a second. And if we're doing it like this, where I am speaking for a longer stretch, I'm just making a longer point, or whatever I'm saying requires me to speak for a longer time, even if it's just one sentence, we typically wouldn't notice it very much. And like it changes when we are dependent on each other's immediate response. And with immediate, I mean so immediate that a quarter of a second starts making a difference. And that's hardly ever, right? Because even in the most heated debates, you will have a moment of interrupting and stumbling over each other's vocal instances before one of the voices naturally gets the overhand and starts doing, again, longer stretches. So because it's like stumbly and chaotic in that changing moment too, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. We don't notice it so much. We do notice it massively when we are trying to synchronize, right? So clapping at once is impossible. And I did some, especially during lockdown, I did some remote vocal training, and I had to refigure my entire way of working because I typically play the piano to whatever people are doing to facilitate their split second to split second development. And I couldn't do that because obviously a quarter of a second is more than a split second. So we couldn't synchronize.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The challenges one might not be aware of.
Yeah. But
working
again,
from home.
For speaking, don't worry about it. Like it wouldn't typically interfere so much.
And it seems to me, well, I have questions regarding personality types and different kinds of voices. And I remember that in our last conversation, we did speak about shy individuals.
Right.
And then maybe you can remind me and the audience, how can a shy person, or is it possible to train the voice to have more impact, or a shy person to take more space through their voice, through voice training only? Or is this something that is related to confidence or opening the body to just increase the space of resonance?
Well, you are asking a fantastic question. Thank you. The answer is, unfortunately, both. Because these two aspects that you rightly address are two sides of the same coin. And what works for one individual might work better the other way around for another. For typical, like basic improvements, that is, right? And I'll stick to those. If we open ourselves up, right? Like, so if you do these heroic open poses on, like in the corridor before you enter a meeting room or like a job interview or whatever, what you do is you do the same things. Do you notice? Like you place the weight of your arms again over the backside of your shoulders. You start making yourself wider in your chest area. You start giving your abdomen more space, and that results in, again, a more relaxed posture. Steady your breathing. And what I didn't say just now, again, you relax the abdomen. I want to link back to what I said earlier. We tend to push less when our abdomen is relaxed, right? So you're facilitating that. And again, you will subconsciously always hear this in your own voice. So at the moment you start speaking with a voice that is coming from a body that is more open, you're going to kickstart a positive feedback loop where you feel better because you sound better than normal, making you feel better, and so on and so forth. So that's how you facilitate a better voice for that situation, by basically just doing physical awareness exercises and easy breathing. But it works the other way around as well. When I'm trying to change somebody's sound, there's no way that they're going to get that sound when they don't when they don't adjust the body to facilitate that sound, right? So some professional singers can do it perhaps, I think, but like some actors too, but most of us mere mortals, when we lay in a weird position like this, you can hear that my voice is starting to like cramp up, right? Like my voice is starting to sound pressed. And only with my experience as a vocalist and working with, like, for instance, opera singers who have to like lay weirdly and still sing their sound, I can do this, where I do the relaxed sound, but like be in a weird position.
Okay, so I'm cramping up now and kind of twisting. And I don't know whether you hear a difference when I speak.
Yeah, look, only a slight bit. Let's just put it like that.
Audience will tell.
Yeah, well, if the goal is to redesign a complete new voice, though, like that's really only possible through dedicated vocal practice. We can change about 95% of how we sound. So that's like the other part of the audience. Like if you want to change how you sound, right? For shy people, if you want your shyness to...
not to shine through.
Yeah, well, or rather if you want to facilitate like all the good parts of your shyness to help you, and perhaps the parts that don't facilitate whatever you're trying to do to equal those out, right? If that's your goal through the voice, right? Like then the basics would be what we just discussed. And then the more advanced steps would be just taking like vocal lessons, but you would need to invest a bit of time, like changing for real, like changing motor system dynamics takes about 60 days of continuous practice. And these are not, well, some people take 60 days of straight like vocal lessons, but most people don't have the resources to do that. So they split it up into chunks, right? But it is possible. Like you can change 95% of how you sound in 60 days.
Interesting. And I wonder whether there is research that would help us understand or would show a difference in, for instance, success or even pay, depending on the pitch of our voice. Because why it comes to my mind is I remember there are lots of studies that show that taller men tend to earn a higher income, or especially more handsome men would earn a higher income. For women, it's a little bit more difficult. I think it's more beautiful women tend to earn higher, but if they're very beautiful, then it flips. Is there something related to the voice that those with a so-called warmer voice or lower pitch tend to be more successful?
Well, not that I'm aware of. If any listener, by the way, can point me in that direction, then by all means contact me. Because I'm looking for research like this. I've been looking for research like this for a while. Because among us vocalists, and especially among us vocal pedagogues, like evidence tend to stay anecdotal or experience-based at best. The anecdotal evidence is that, yes, a lower pitch and or a warmer sound, so like a relatively louder, lower overtone spectrum, facilitates career path, essentially. But in my experience, that's really just anecdotal. People just, it's an urban myth, essentially. Like people keep repeating that that's the case without ever diving into it. And the reason that I expect it to be an urban myth rather than anything else, again, lacking solid evidence, is my experience. I've been working with people a bit higher up the ladder for the main part of my career now. And when I ask them what they appreciate in voices, and I don't ask them this question, I facilitate that question through asking them an easier question. Yeah, it's no secret. Name 5 voices that you could listen to forever, and name 5 voices that you want to switch off immediately. That will give anyone a clear, sort of like a clear indication of their own preference. And it will give a trained professional like myself enough information to guess what this person likes best. And I have to make a brief detour here, if you allow me. We talk about aesthetics here, and aesthetics are a bit of a confusing factor, both in singing and speaking. In singing, it's more obvious, but in speaking, it goes too. Especially when we consider this particular celebrated voice type that is low in pitch and loud in low overtones. Typically, people would refer to this voice type as deep or warm. It's a combination of pitch and sound color, or low. And that's, by the way, a mistaking thing. Like low refers to nothing in particular, so we have to avoid that word, or to do too many things, really. But like to get back to my original diversion, aesthetics versus effectivity, right? Like if I ask people what their preferred voices are, they are sometimes aligning with like our general taste. So they will sometimes align with that low pitch, loud, lower overtone voice type, but they might not. And what that resembles is how a voice is effective for them, what type of voice works for them, rather than what we typically agree on. And this is my main point why vocal coaching should always have components of some sort of customization, right? Even if you do it for yourself, like informing yourself by listening to sources like this podcast right now. Even if you're doing work for yourself, it's good to be aware that if you're mainly referring to your own taste and not to the general taste, because, and I'm coming back to my main point, asking these people in executive positions what kind of voices they would want to work with, essentially, right? What facilitate their workflow are not typically low-pitched and loud, lower overtone voices. They are not pressed. That's the only real common feature of all of those voice types, right? And then that's in sound. So at the point where we're sounding pressed, like there are some sports coaches who go like this, and the odd individual will include one example of this sort of like, you can do this.
Physically, it stresses me.
You can just like go do this match in the diamond, go for it now, sort of thing. But most people would prefer this, even in the list where there would be like the sports coach pressed voice, right? There would be 4 more voices in there in the list of 5 where the individual will have a free voice. And with free, I mean not pressed, like having as little pressedness as possible in their voice type. So this is the only common sound feature. And then to close off, the common execution feature, because in my work, I make the distinction between sonic characteristics and then stuff that happens in time and space, which I call parameters, just for easy understanding. The vocal parameter, so the thing that happens in time and space, that is most valuable to most of these individuals, would be speed, right? The speed shouldn't be too fast, but it shouldn't be too slow. And it should follow a natural line of things being stressed, being slower, while bridging things can, speed up a little bit more like this. Right. And that's the only common feature that I find these individuals higher up the ladder prefer. Right. And if they prefer that, then I would guess, but again, this is my guess, there's no studies conducted to prove this, is that they would be looking for individuals like that. Because what is proven in studies is that people look for people like themselves, which is why emancipation is so hard on the work floor, right?
Yeah. And it makes total sense to me. And just underlines the fact how our voice completes our personality. So when you were using this pressed voice, I got shivers because it stressed me. I felt something is wrong and something like I need to speed up or do something. So if I'm working with someone who constantly puts me in this stressful position, I don't want to listen to them. That becomes a risk. You don't want your advisor to speak to you in a way that you actually don't want to listen, or even your brain at some point shuts down because like, okay, danger, danger. And then also if it's too slow, then I might just deviate with my thoughts. So I don't have time.
Yeah, but if it's too fast, you can you start deviating too, right? Because you can't, your brain doesn't have a moment to stop and think and be like, whoa, where is this going? And at the moment, I think about here, people start thinking about their phones and
Yeah. Yes, I think through the intonation, you facilitate the information transfer.
Yeah. Essentially, if you slow down and if you allow yourself to at a place that is, I would say 30% too slow for most people, you have to start focusing more on what you just for people who aren't watching, what you pointed out with your hand, which is indeed intonation, the literal changing of the pitch, which we commonly refer to as the tone. Not just that though. So the pitch changes. So if I go up, I'm doing something different than when I go down, right? But when I am slowing down, you can hear that I'm more dependent on my melody in my voices. So my alteration of pitch as I move through my sentences, because I need that to keep my audience on board. And then the cool thing is people typically don't notice this. So when we slow down just a nudge, we invite ourselves, we facilitate our own better speaking, our better making use of vocal execution parameters that, we don't even have to start thinking about. We just do it.
And with this, one example comes to my mind, and I wonder whether you mentioned that in the previous conversation or whether I heard it somewhere else, that coming to the impact bit, that sometimes we have, especially if we're insecure, we tend to up our voice at the end of a sentence as if it was a question. And this triggers doubt, in the listener. So for instance, when I introduce myself, I am a podcaster.
Yeah.
As opposed to I am a podcaster.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is culturally dependent, I must say. So people from the language, people that I've worked with from Australia, Ireland, and India, they would be less receptive for this because their sentences would end upward even when they're confirmations. But for most continental Europeans and for most of the English-speaking world, it's the opposite, right? So we confirm something by taking a downward melodic slope. And we ask a question or leave it open by going up, right? But this is culturally dependent. So it does matter what audience you're talking to or what kind of group you're facilitating, to bring it back to the topic.
Yeah. So what would be your suggestions of small quick fixes to how we can have more impact? What does it actually mean having more impact with the voice? I would say to come across as more trustworthy, as creating the safe space. And we talked about that through the warmer voice, slower. Are there any other tips that you can give to use our voice to have more voice?
Yeah, thanks. I will give a few tips. But before that, I want to pause at the point where you said have more impact with the voice, which you then rephrased as, in my own rephrasing now, as having more of a voice, right? These are phrases that people typically use a lot, right? Also in acting and most presentation training programs that I know of use a phrase like that. And it's pretty vague if you don't specify. So I want to pause here and do specify what that means for me, because even for those people hosting those trainings, it's often not that clear what it means because, and listeners might not know this, but like modern vocal training is a relatively young field. Like it only started developing in the late 80s, replacing centuries of tradition only gradually. And this is by no means a process that is finished. So most vocal professionals will still use traditional methods where things are more copy-paste or try to like copy what the professional's doing rather than anyone in the room really knowing what the voice is, how it's made, how it works on individuals like the speaker, the singer, but also the audience in the room or on the other end of a microphone, right? So that's the place where this confusion may come from. The fact that like thinking about the voice is a relatively new thing and communicating about the voice in clear language, like that's referencing what's actually going on below is equally new. Right. So I find it super important to pause there and look at what it means to have a voice, to have impact. And think about it as like, how can you have more impact with the voice? How can you have more of a voice? It's when the voice does the job it's supposed to be doing well. A good voice is a voice that does the job. And it may sound trivial, but that's not how people presented it in the past. The way it was presented was like, you add something, right? You add something to something else. But like a good voice will facilitate what you're trying to do. Like I'm dressing up in a particular way to facilitate not my beautiful self. Well, perhaps like it just the tiniest nudge, but the main thing that I'm facilitating is my effectiveness of what I'm trying to like accomplish out there, right? Only for
the words.
Yeah. Only for catwalk models, like the looks would be, the thing. And for most of us, wearing that suit or wearing that beautiful other piece of clothing would facilitate what we're trying to get across. And the voice can be looked at the same. Like if you're not like doing spoken word or singing, the voice is not the center of attention, but it is important because it's one of the first things the brain will notice. So it will coat everything else in a particular mood. And that's having more impact with the voice. More impact with having more impact with the voice or having more of a voice typically means that it facilitates us being heard. And us being heard means two things. us being heard means the physical state of ourselves that we're communicating along with the words, that is being registered in this mirroring thing that everybody does subconsciously. So people are hearing the voice and mirroring how that might feel. And this way we're communicating how we feel about what we're saying, right? Beside the phrasing. And then like a good voice facilitates the actual language being registered smoothly, right? Because again, if I'm pressed, like your brain will have a harder time registering what I'm saying just because your body's like, no, man, no. So yeah, if I'm like, and that would explain why most of these individuals higher up the ladder would prefer a freer voice type, because it facilitates easy communication. And that's what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to get information across, and we're trying to simultaneously emotionally reassure one another that we're on the same page, that we're part of the same team.
Hello, listener. Are you tired of listening to my podcast voice praising our sponsor Session Lab in each episode? I think it's time to pass the mic over to you. So if you are as much of a Session Lab fan and user as I am, please share your experience and praise, and don't be shy of add a sentence of self-promo. Send me your soundbite and you might hear yourself on the next show and find your name and URL in the show notes. I'm looking forward to hearing from you.